What makes you move to North Carolina?
Towards the end of 14, I was working a lot, working on my car or our car, trying to get that thing better, like trying to figure out how to go faster, wanted to learn more. And I was almost every night of the week helping buddies on their cars, their late models, for multiple reasons. One was I wanted to learn how to work on a car, how to make it go faster.
Yep.
So by the end of 2014, I'm like, man, like I'm wore out. Like I'm working all the time on race cars at night, and I loved it. I freaking, it was amazing. So I'm like, man, I wonder if I could go to North Carolina, because at that point, like I had kind of figured out that this is where everybody was. Everybody's in Charlotte.
Yep.
And I wonder if I could go to North Carolina and get a job to work on race cars for a living. And I had raced against a guy, never talked to him, but I raced against him a couple times at the Dells in 14, and I had seen he had moved here. And so the first 2 weeks of 15 in January, I took off of work, which wasn't a big deal. It was snowing and windy, so we weren't doing roofs. And I drive to North Carolina. I'm going to go find a job. And I gave myself 2 weeks. If I can't find a job in 2 weeks, then I'll figure something else out. I'll stay in Wisconsin for another year and try to figure out a different route or something different. And of course, I had a bunch of resumes made up, and I mean, there was nothing on it, right?
Yeah.
I was a roofer. I was a roofer that worked on my buddy's late models and did a little bit of my own racing. So I came down and got a long-term like hotel thing, motel thing, and I stayed there. And every day I would go to race shops. I would hit like 6 or 7 or 8 race shops a day, everywhere. Mooresville, Concord. I was everywhere. Anything from modified teams, late model teams, cup teams, it didn't matter. I dropped one off here.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the first week goes by, and on Friday, I talked to an ARCA team down in the drag strip park, and he sounded somewhat promising that he would consider me. So I'm like, all right, that's my first hit, right? Everybody else was like, didn't want to talk to me, didn't have time. Like, oh, yeah, put your resume in there, we'll look over it, right?
Yep.
So the second week rolls around, Monday comes and goes. We're driving all over the place. 2 of my buddies came down with me just to hang out.
Yep.
And Monday, nothing. Tuesday, it was like mid-morning, I stopped by Richie Waters Motorsports, late model team. And he was doing some truck stuff too as well. And I walk in, I walk up and there's nobody in the office. Like the office is empty. I can see through the glass windows. So there's a door off to the side that says employees only. And I'm like, well, like, let's see what's behind this door, because at this point I don't have anything to lose. So I open the door and I look in, and there's like a bunch of late models lined up, and I'm like, man, that's awesome, right? So I walk in, and there's 2 guys working on the setup plate. One younger kid about my age, and another guy, older guy. He wasn't that old, but grumpy old feller, Bobby Gill. And I walk up to him, and Bobby looks at me like I'm in the wrong place. Like, what are you doing in here, But that's just how he was. So I'm like, yeah, here to drop off a resume, and I'm like sweating bullets. I'm like, man, I shouldn't be in here, right? So I'm handing him my resume. He says, yeah, boss is upstairs, so I'll get it to him. I'm like, all right, thanks. And I go out the door, and I'm like, well, that was a waste. Like, he's going to throw that right in the trash can. And so we sit in the parking lot for probably 5 minutes, and I'm on my maps trying to figure out where this ARCA team was that I was at Friday, because I hadn't heard from him. So I'm like, I'm going to drive over there and just show my face again, like see what I can make happen. So we leave, and my phone rings, and it's a 704 number, and I'm like, all right, this is that ARCA team calling me. So I answer it, and it's Richie Waters. He says, hey, you just dropped the resume off. Yep. Can you come back, talk? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'll be right there. So make a U-turn, go back, and I go up in his office, and we sit down and we talk and work out a deal. Talked to him for like 20 minutes. Shook his hand. I told him I could start on Monday.
Yeah.
This was Tuesday. And I'm like, okay. Like, I'm starting Monday. I still got to go back home to get my stuff and take my buddies back and come back and find a place to live.
Yeah.
So we go back home. Before we went home, I messaged this guy that I had raced against in 14, but I'd never met him. I'm like, hey, like, I'm in the area and, like, looking for a job. So I had met up with him, like, over that weekend. He's like, yeah, if you get lucky enough to get a job, like, yeah, you can sleep on my couch, you know? So I call him after I left Richie's. Hey, I need a place to stay next week. And I go home, and yeah, that's how it started. Loaded up my stuff and came back, and started working for Richie.
So you go to the Snowball Derby with Richie in 2015. There you established contact at MDM Motorsports. You worked for them in 2016 under Marty Lindley, who's here.
Yep.
You ran K&N East in an ARC series with drivers like Kyle Benjamin and Harrison Burton and Zane Smith, and that's recent.
Yeah.
You had a cousin that worked over at Ganassi and got you hooked up over there to interview with Chad on the 48 car.
Yeah.
For Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah. So Ron Malik was car chiefing on the 48. So his now wife Ashley was at Ganassi. So my cousin Ruben was knew her.
Yep.
So that's how the contact happened with Ron.
Do you remember going into Chad's office? Or
I
did
do.
you have yeah. So you'd been around for, let's say, 3.5 years, kind of?
So the conversation with Chad actually started in early of 18, like the end of 17.
Yeah.
So I'd been at MDM for 2 years. But Chad wouldn't hire me. He said I didn't have enough experience.
Right.
Like, I was way too green. I didn't know what I was doing.
For sure.
I'm like, man, all right. So we talked that whole winter, like back and forth. And then Ron came off the road. Jesse becomes the new car chief. And now I'm like in contact with him. Jesse's still trying to get me on. January rolls around and I tell him, I'm like, look, I'm going to commit to MDM and to Marty to work for them for 2018 through the championship. We're running for the championship with Zane Smith and ARCA. So I'm not going to walk out halfway through the season. So, like, just so you know. So I would really like to make this happen, like, if we can. And Chad wouldn't do it. He said I didn't have enough experience still. So I'm like, all right. So it goes a couple months into the season, my phone rings. It's Chad. He says, hey, I need a mechanic. And I'm like, so as time had gone on from when I became a race fan and like figured out how the sport was, the 48 was the pinnacle. When I moved here, that was my goal. I wanted to work for the best team, for the best crew chief driver combination. Like they were the best.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the best, be part of the best, beat the best. And now we're, a couple months into the season, and I tell him, no thanks. Like, I turn it down. I tell them no. Like, it's what I wanted. I wanted to work on the 48, but we're in I think it was like June. And I'm like, no, like, I told you beginning of the year, if I commit to something, like, or commit to someone, that's what I stick to. I can't bail halfway through the season. And I'm like, man, like, this is probably a mistake.
No
Like, I
kidding.
will never get that opportunity again.
Yeah.
Never get it. And then as that summer went on, they stayed in contact, and sure enough, it all came down to in October. They hired me. We went to Kansas for our finale, ARCA finale. Our race is Friday. My hire date was Saturday at Hendrick. And MDM guys, I helped them. We loaded everything. They went home. Chad left me his keys in his rental car and the address to their hotel. And, like, I didn't know any of the guys. I knew Jesse, sort of. Like, I had met with him, I think, twice during that time. But I didn't know any of the mechanics. Like, I didn't know anybody. And so now I wake up the next morning in their hotel and go with them to the racetrack, like, trying to meet everybody and just, like, figure it out as we go. So they have a fill-in front-end mechanic, and I'm supposed to shadow him all weekend. All right, so I, like, watch everything he does, figure out how everything works. And we go back to the shop Tuesday morning or whatever it was that next week. And, all right, you're the front-end mechanic on the 48. Like, I'm like, I thought I was going to shadow him for another, like, week or two or something, you know? Nope, it's all you. So we go to Martinsville, and I'm the primary mechanic on a cup car. And I've never worked on a cup car. Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Jesus.
But at the end of the day, it's nuts and bolts and wrenches, and I figured it out.
So you worked on that team until they change over to the 5 and Kyle Larson comes to race, and y'all win a championship. You also, as you've mentioned a couple times, you build a street stock car and you're back to driving, and you're driving good. You're winning races. You've moved off of the road, off of the cup stuff, right? Now you're kind of you're doing some track cars and turning old Gen 6s into public, cars to sell to public folks. You worked on the Garage 56 program as a front end mechanic there. You went overseas to the race.
Yep.
And you started an automotive repair company called Yoder Automotive, based in Kannapolis, North Carolina.
Yep.
What's your plan?
My plan is to do short track racing.
You love driving your street stock.
I do.
Right? You want to do that as much as you can.
I want to do that as much as I can.
That was the motivation for you won this championship as a mechanic on the 5 car for Larson, but that was the motivation to move away from that because you hadn't been there long.
Yeah.
Right? You could have stayed there, made great money, right?
Yeah.
But you're like, I got to drive. I want to race.
That part of that decision to leave cup racing also happened with NASCAR going away from
the car. You knew
practice.
Oh, practice. Yeah. And so
when we had the 1 hour practice sessions or hour and a half,
you could work.
Like, as a mechanic.
Yeah.
I could work. Like, when we had changes, spring changes, shock changes.
That was your job.
Like, whatever it was, that the competitor in me, like, it was a team aspect, right? Sure. You're trying to win as a team. But at the same time, I'm so competitive that I would watch other mechanics do their shock changes, do their spring changes. I would, like, count in my head how long it took them, and I'm like, I'm gonna beat that. I'm gonna be faster and better than that. And I'm just super competitive, right? So when practice went away, now that goes away.
Yeah.
You don't really have that anymore.
Yeah.
So I needed another challenge. I needed a challenge, and it kind of fell into the same time. My car was done. We were winning races, cars fast, and it rekindled the passion I had for racing, which was on the short tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the reason I got into racing, was because of going to the short tracks. Yeah, we watched it on TV,
Yep.
but that was the whole reason. So now that's my goal, is to do short track racing, race my street stock. I'd like to move up in the late models at some point, if money happens right, sponsors, that type of stuff, and run Yoder Automotive.